It makes no sense why a major SSP spends more money with a certain publisher through an indirect supply chain through a direct supply. It does not make any sense unless you buy in to any of the three things that I just described. And I think the third thing that you just described of intermediaries being really good at actively managed traffic shaping in a presumably some sort of an automated way across multiple SSPs, I think it really does work.
Because again, I think we're all sitting there going, there's going to be another conversation around this in 6 months to a year.
There's a basic side of things, which I would say every sophisticated publisher is already very good at. And that is just making sure that all the supply I'm actually selling has at least like the basic KPIs covered, be it viewability, be it time in view, not refreshing it too often, all of these kind of things. But also lazy loading them properly and as close as possible to when they actually need it, so that I'm not flooding more than I need to. In this case, like supply that no one wants because it's not going to be seen. But the same thing about different geos. If I have traffic from a country where my SSPs don't really care, and for me it's such a small percentage, why even bother running an auction for it, or maybe I just give it directly to backfill. But then I can take it a bit more sophisticated and I can say, okay, if a certain partner isn't bidding a couple of times, maybe I should exclude them. It works. It does have some results. It's a little bit tricky because at some point in time the frequency cap resets and all of a sudden they start bidding again. Or all of a sudden an SSP is saying, oh, actually the floor price was too high, let's reduce it. And all of a sudden I'm getting bids from that partner. So that's a bit tricky to figure out because things are constantly changing and very quickly. Or it's a campaign only runs until 6 p.m. and then only starts the next day. These things are very difficult to optimize manually. And that is where we could bring in machine learning to run it a bit more automatic and also adjust it by itself. So we could easily say, hey, I'm willing to take a potential loss of 0.5% and just cut as much as is possible and have it constantly recalibrate itself to make sure that I'm not like accidentally for a day losing money. But it is very reactive to all the changes, to the quarter-to-quarter change, to Black Friday and so on. When I do this, it becomes quite difficult to measure what is the actual impact it is having. But if we are looking at this kind of like bid landscape and we're really looking at like what is the distribution of the bids coming in, if we look at it from that perspective, we can see the change happening quite often. But we do still have to keep in mind that what we are traffic shaping should cover as much as possible of the supply chains as I have, because if I only apply it on 10% of the requests, while I still have, 3 or 4 server-side bidders where it's not applied to, it doesn't help. There's still a lot of duplication happening. But also what we have found in various tests is that it is possible to create one supply path that is quite clean. And I believe it's also the strategy of some of the SSP resellers, where really like traffic shaping is being applied to a very high degree. Where only like a really strong percentage of traffic is going through and a high focus is on winning impressions, not just on receiving bids. And then quite often it is visible that an SSP is buying more through that path incrementally than they are buying through the other paths. And there's nothing different about this path versus the other paths, because like although maybe this path is only 20% of the inventory is going through it, the others 80 or 100% are going through it. But if all of a sudden this one path is starting to make more money than the other paths, something is working.
There's so much in there that I think is really good, and I think one of the key pieces to that is just, and again, maybe I'm making a statement from a publisher perspective that isn't real. I've always felt, and I actually mentioned this at Basecamp, of like, not every impression is created equal, and I think that there's an aspect that your CFO would not agree. Right, and that there's this aspect that like, if we created the impression, we should go and try to sell the impression for as high as we can. There's one nuance to what you said that it really, really attracted me on that, which was between machine learning, applying AI to doing this kind of the proper way. Like if we can really inform this in smart ways, like as opposed to just maximize revenue. How much revenue can we get from everything we do, and start to say, this is the signal I want to send out to be, this is my inventory. I want to represent it, well. I think that there's greater and greater chance of winning and going through that process, and that just takes the right partners, the right information, and really looking at it through that lens. And I think that that's going to help. Any last thoughts, gentlemen, before we call it?
I can't resist when Nils talks about reselling. I think there are three possible explanations where an intermediary that doesn't have its own direct DSP integrations becomes a major contributor to the revenue of a publisher. And I think you touched on one of them, which I'll save for last. The first is it's got a giant sales team and it's out there selling, proprietary demand. I'm not convinced that really exists in any material way, but that could be a thing. The second is they're tampering with signals. This definitely happens. They inject fraudulent user IDs, misrepresent the video characteristics, and so on. That happens, but that's not going to happen with the reputable companies. And the third, I think, is what you just touched on. I think is probably the most compelling evidence that traffic shaping managed in a unified way across multiple SSP connections really is yield producing. It makes no sense why a major SSP spends more money with a certain publisher through an indirect supply chain through a direct supply. It does not make any sense unless you buy in to any of the three things that I just described. And I think the third thing that you just described of intermediaries being really good at actively managed traffic shaping in a presumably some sort of an automated way across multiple SSPs, I think it really does work. I can't imagine that the long-term state of the supply chain is that requires an extra financial hop in the supply chain. But if that works, move it closer to the publisher and orchestrate this traffic shaping across all connections. This, I don't know, this whole thing still feels pretty foggy to me, but that feels like a very plausible direction of change for the way that header bidding works.
That's great. So I think we left people with a lot to think through and kind of dive through and stuff like that. If someone wants to talk to Assertive Yield, to your team or to you, what's the next step they should take?
Just reach out to anyone pretty much, or even to me directly, be it through LinkedIn, be it through email, through a website or similar.
You love talking about this stuff, so no one should be afraid to ask you. Every time I talk to you, I learn something, so I really appreciate that.
I'm also really not it is a thing that really has happened for the industry for a very long time, and I feel like we are, iteration free of it. There was a lot of multi-hop selling in the past, it was resolved, but we are kind of back at the point where the same amount of duplication is happening through a different way. And it just feels like this kind of repeating thing where the step-by-step kind of really hurting the industry more and more and getting it to a breaking point. So I really think this is a topic that needs to become more mainstream, that needs to get more support behind it, that to motivate and understand. I think the first step is really the moment people understand, then they can take it as part into their consideration, into their decisions and so on. But as long as no one really understands what's happening or what might be happening, it's very difficult to pick a side or to really make a decision on thinking about the long-term effects of it and so on. So for me, it's really a lot about we have seen a lot, looking at data, testing different things and so on. And I'm always happy to share it. And if there are questions about it, always happy to give additional guidance and so on. And there are many ways to, as I mentioned, to really do it in-house in a way that works. There are ways to do it more sophisticated for some publishers. Sophistication is more important and makes more sense for others. Doing it in-house at a smaller scale is better. So there's really, at the end of the day, I think it's a matter where we all have to work together to figure out what steps can we take, baby steps, because we can't just change the industry, to at least improve it step by step.
Well, I appreciate your efforts to educate publishers on the options. And again, everyone is different on that approach, and levels of sophistication are different. So I think that that's really helpful. And Chris, thank you for always your approach toward understanding the marketplace and how much you share about that with not only your DSP clients, but across two publishers. We all look to you to help give us some light into all of this. So I really appreciate your efforts and stuff like that.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for watching. And I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation on DPO mastery at some other time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.